development plan was a really UI heavy game in some elements. And yeah, from there, they kind of gave me a little bit more of each project we worked on.
Very, very cool. So it looks like we're having a bit of technical difficulties here. I just want to make sure everyone's actually getting this stream. And I apologize for tonight with all the technical issues. It looks like now it is going live, so I believe everyone can see us. So I'm gonna go ahead and restart that. It looks like it was in preview mode, so now everyone should be getting this. If you're tuning in, my name is Jonathan Weinberger. I'm the Authorized Unity Instructor for the Ultimate Guide to Game Development with Unity, and I'm here with Jonathan Jennings. And Jonathan and I go way back. We met about 5 years ago when he got his first step into the gaming industry, and I was still trying to figure out how to get to where he is at that first step. And for a little bit, we actually like worked together and collaborated, and he gave me a lot of great advice to get my foot in the door, and ultimately, you know, helped me strive to get to where I am today. So, Jonathan, for everyone tuning in now, thanks for being on the show again. All right, so there we go. Okay, now everyone's saying they're good. All right, so basically 5 years ago, you started out as a traditional, you know, your traditional story. You loved playing video games. You wanted to get into gaming. You attended DeVry for their game programming simulation program. And then about 6 months later, you got your first job interview. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So would you say that now in terms of education wise, were you entirely self-taught, or did DeVry give you the skills you needed?
Right. So the big issue with, I feel like, games education in general, there's only so much that any program can teach you. And with game development in particular, you will never know how to make a game until you make your own game. That's just my personal philosophy. So DeVry definitely worked as a great facilitator for my education. Like, I learned a lot about AI and programming in general, and working with different engines that I would have never been able to dive into myself. Like, they definitely gave me a good roadmap for education. But what got me the job, I would definitely say, were the side projects I worked on outside of class. I was always the last one in class most days, just kind of tweaking different projects we'd work on. And I would work on little text adventures and just small projects myself. And those were the things I put on my Behance and my portfolio. And those are what got me interviews. And that's what led to my first job.
Very cool. So how important is your Behance profile is like your baby, right? And it's really funny. Anytime someone ever says to me, what's an example of someone's portfolio, I always forward them to your portfolio, because it's just like, if I had an idea for a portfolio, it's Jonathan Jennings' portfolio. How important is Behance, and how important has your portfolio been in getting jobs?
Right. So you don't have to necessarily put your work on Behance, but for me, it's worked really well, just having that visual element. But it's super important. If you don't have something like Behance where you can show off your work, then I would strongly advocate you have a website or a portal that has links to your work, because again, game development is such a hands-on field that the people who hire you want to see that you've either done things like this before or you've attempted to do things like this before. So that's why publishing apps is such a big requirement on so many job boards, because if they don't know that you can do it, they kind of don't want to spend the money to maybe get you to produce some kind of content.
Right.
It's massively important.
Right. And that's the onboarding process, right? The onboarding process can be super expensive. Oftentimes, right. When it comes to games, if you have a portfolio, they know what you can do, versus they don't have to say, all right, let's bring on this guy based on what he says he can do, and turns out he can't. So
at my first job, I think my producer who worked at Activision, he said he interviewed, I think he said he interviewed about 100 candidates for the job. He felt there were 10 that actually had demonstrable work that could actually do the job. Right. And of that, of the top 10, I was the one that he picked. But those are the people you're competing against, right? If you don't have something to show, then you're one of the 90 that got rejected before even being considered.
Right. Exactly. I mean, absolutely. I mean, I tell everyone who takes my course, The most important thing you can do is get an internet presence and show what you can do, because at the end of the day, like, this is such a competitive market. You need something, and if you're interested in seeing what an awesome portfolio looks like, there's a link on the overlay here. Go to behance.net/JonathanJ, and you'll see his portfolio. He's got a wide range of professional work as well as work from his personal projects. So talk about, so your first job was Sabretooth Interactive, and you worked on a game for Animal Planet. So what can you tell us about that?
Right. So Animal Planet was my first mobile game. At the time, the publisher was Nuco Toys. So they were pushing pretty much a card system. So essentially, you'd have a card, you'd put the card on your iPad screen, and we had a third-party SDK that would read the card, and your animal would load into the app. That was pretty much our hook for Animal Planet. Otherwise, it was pretty much a third-person adventure game with an educational focus. But it was pretty much a third-party adventure card game, and with racing elements. It was kind of a weird micro, but it was a lot of fun to work on, actually. Yeah.
Nice, very cool. And then so the reason why I'm so excited to have you on the show is because everyone I've interviewed before mostly is on the West Coast, or I'm sorry, not the West Coast, the East Coast and upper like Northeast. And on the East Coast, game developers and software engineers are sort of known for like job stability. Now in California, there's a stigma that it's very common that you work 6 to 8 months and then you walk across the street and you do another 6 to 8 months, and you're like the perfect example of that. Am I right?
Yeah, especially yeah.
What can you tell us about like your experience of going job to job, and what's it like being a game developer in the San Diego area, right?
I'm more near LA. But,
okay, so LA. Okay, so near like the California side of things. What's it like?
Right. So it's an adventure. I'll tell you that. It's definitely you kind of have to get used to it. Like, I think when I first communicated people, like, I'd have these 9-month job spans, and then I'd be out of work and I'd be getting a new job. And like, you tell people, oh, I got a new job. And like, people go again, because it's so uncommon or it's so uncustomary to other job positions. But it keeps you excited. And I feel like, I know me, myself personally, like, I get bored after a while. So to a degree, it can be hard to manage that instability, but to a certain degree, it's refreshing to work on something for 9 months. You essentially push out your baby, and then you get an opportunity to work on something new. It's amazing. Yeah, I love it, and my Behance has been super instrumental in allowing me other opportunities. Like, I'll be laid off, I'll push out my resumes, they'll have a link to my Behance, and it's been a common topic in pretty much all my interviews. Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, I mean, I imagine so. And it looks like a bunch of questions are coming in, so I want to go ahead and answer some questions from my community on Discord as well as YouTube for a moment here. So actually, before I take a lot of these questions, because some of them are related to VR, you worked on the Ghostbusters title, which is insanely cool. What can you tell us about working on the VR game, and specifically what your role was on it? And I know you mentioned you were on the Google Cardboard side of things, right?
Yeah. Right. So there were two apps. There's like the Google Cardboard app, which is what I worked on, and then there's a companion Vive app. So our teams work together to like exchange sound effects and just kind of get questions on how they were working on things, and they had questions on how we worked on a few things. That was my first VR project at all. A friend actually, he kind of recruited me to join his team. And so I did, and I met with the studio CEO, and it was my first opportunity to cut my teeth on that. My role was, at first I was the primary engineer, so I helped them be able to they had a real issue creating like Android builds, even to put a build into the Google Cardboard. Right. So I helped them develop their build process and get everything sorted out. Then I worked on the game mechanics. I worked on all the core mechanics. Then they brought in another engineer, and he did a lot of the localization. But when he wasn't available, I'd work on the localization. I worked on a lot of the core game mechanics for like just the simple clicks and presses of like having like input objects is what they were described as in the scene. And my favorite, my absolute baby for that project was the proton gun. Growing up as a kid, that was always the coolest thing to see the Ghostbusters capture a ghost with their proton guns and pull it into the trap. And so they gave me the challenge of like kind of replicating what they had. And I'm a big fan of the Ghostbusters game that was on the 360. I think Terminal Reality developed it, and it was really, I had a lot of fun creating. I basically had to create a particle system and then create like a way that our particles kind of interacted with, like there actually had to be a ray that came from particles. So it was a little bit complicated. I had to play with it a little bit, but it was just fun creating the proton gun. It was like, it was super exciting. So I geeked out, and they gave me a lot of leeway to do it. So that's even better.
Very cool. Would you say that is like your highest, is that your most, I guess, is that your most iconic piece of work so far, is working for a title such as Ghostbusters?
That was pretty iconic. I think so. It'd be between that and with Thunderjack's Log Runner. That was
that's a very polished game. Yeah.
Right, and so that I enjoyed that because I was in charge of making the initial prototype for the game. Like our producer, he was playing games in a similar vein. And so he had an idea of this themed game where you'd be this character on a barrel going down a river. And he assigned it to someone else. And the other engineer, he wasn't particularly excited about, he wasn't great with working with empty canvases. Versus me, I love an empty canvas. If you give me an empty Unity project and tell me to build something, I'm going to go crazy.
Yeah, I'm the same way.
And so they allowed me the opportunity to prototype it. And so even though it wasn't assigned to me, I could see exactly how I would build it. And so that night I went home, I made a really basic paper prototype and just kind of explained like high level how I would do it. And the next day, I emailed it. The next day I came in, my producer talked to me and the other engineer. He assigned me to actually like build the prototype and asked me to give him an estimate. I gave him 4 days, and the other engineer kind of sourced the assets for the prototype. And at the end of that week, we had a really basic demo to show, and the studio got behind it, and it actually it became fleshed out. But that
very cool. Very cool. So that actually might lead into some questions that people have about how studios work. So we'll get into that a little bit later. So now that we talked a bit about your VR experience, I definitely want to go to the Discord here and check out some of the questions. So I got a question here from one of the users. And the question is, for developing in the VR field, what skills do you feel are a big draw towards VR? Is it more programming, or is it 3D modeling, environment art? Like, what's the prime skill that people are looking for when it comes to VR development?
Boy, so the cool thing, the weird thing, the exciting thing about VR is there's a lot of shared skill sets that work in VR that are very game focused. So it gives us all pretty much an opportunity to move our skills to VR. I think right now the hottest thing is anybody who knows how to make a VR product as an engineer, you're pretty popular right now. So I would definitely recommend, if you don't have programming experience, or if you kind of know how to program with Unity especially, this is a great time to jump into the VR space. Because there's a lot of opportunity, and everybody kind of wants to explore VR products, even if it's not necessarily the best application of their product. And artistically, there's still a lot of opportunities. The cool and exciting thing about VR, right, is that there's a lot of unrealized things about it. So as far as UI design, like there's still UI is a really exciting field for for VR, because there's so much not determined about UI. Like, what is the optimal UI in a VR experience? And depending on the game or the application itself, that could differ so drastically, right? So I mean, if you have a game skill set, then I recommend exploring VR and even making like a small side project with friends or even alone, and just saying, even if you could just create like a basic environment, if you could move your models into a room and create a build and see it in VR, I think you'd be ahead of the curve, or you'd be right on the curve.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, even here in Atlanta and like almost, I'd say across the entire world right now, it's like this is the year for VR and AR and mixed reality with like the new HoloLens. So so that leads to, if someone wanted to get started creating VR apps today, what do they need? How do they get started?
Right. So I definitely recommend the cardboard because it's such an easy easy entry point. The SDK is free and everything, and it's really simple to implement. Versus things like the Gear VR and like, you have Oculus IDs, which make it a little bit more complicated, or like even the Vive. So I would recommend you start playing with the Gear VR, and then basic stuff like understanding stereo and understanding space and how to create interactable objects. Those will translate directly into Vive, directly into the Oculus, directly into Gear, or any other headset. And yeah, so I definitely recommend just picking up the cardboard as an entry point and then going from there.
Very cool. So in terms of headsets, because you named pretty much all of them, which do you believe is the best to develop on?
Man, I am such a Vive fanboy.
Yeah, same here. Vive all the way. The new Vive Pro looks insane. Still waiting on pricing because I need it. It's so good. The Vive is unreal. If you guys have never experienced the Vive, definitely check out the Vive versus like the PSVR or Gear VR, as well as the Oculus. And the Vive, just for me, it wins every time.
Yeah, absolutely, hands down. And I love my PSVR too. I think what is it? Office Simulator? No.
Job Simulator. Yeah, Job Simulator.
Job Simulator is I think it's a fun game. Like it's really stupid, but it's such a great game. I definitely, if you could play it on the PSVR or the Oculus or the Vive, I think it's a fun, like just kind of intro to VR, like as far as a game.
I think the people who created Job Simulator worked on the Rick and Morty game for the Vive.
Yeah, I'm so excited for that for PSVR.
It's so much fun.
It's
an awesome game. I was in New York recently, and New York City, if any of you guys get a chance to go to New York City, they opened up a 16,000 square foot warehouse that's like an amusement park of just VR demos. And my fiance and I, we spent like 2.5 hours in there just going through countless demos, games, applications of VR. And my God, it was amazing. I mean, I walked out of there like ready to buy the Vive Pro. I was like, I need it now. It was so awesome.
Very cool. Very cool.
All right, so just going through some of the more of the questions I have here. Let me see here. I'm gonna go and just check out the YouTube channel real quickly. Okay. So right here, we have someone here who is learning. They're new to Unity development, and they're an experienced developer, but they're new to Unity, and they want to learn augmented reality and virtual reality. Yeah, so what, in terms of developing AR, where should they start?
Right. So I'm actually pretty new to AR myself. I started the first AR. Well, so there's Vueforia. I think Vueforia is a pretty classical AR example, but we're kind of AR as a scene is moving away from like target-based AR experiences. So while Vueforia would be a good entry point into AR, it's kind of shifting away from that type of AR. So ARKit is pretty fun, and it's pretty hot right now because Apple products are based around it. There's ARKit, and I believe AR Studio is the Android equivalent, and I would definitely recommend taking a look at both of those. Yeah, it's funny because the intimidating part to most people about AR or VR is essentially the camera, right? And really, that's all that makes an AR or VR experience. Right. It's the camera is not, it's not. You are the camera,
right?
So really, like the actual AR implementation isn't complicated. It's just learning how to make an experience or something using this new type of camera system.
Right. And if you're interested in making AR apps, top of the food chain is probably ARKit from Apple right now. But if you're interested in developing for both Android and Apple with a great solution, Vuforia is the dominant player in that space. And that's I developed AR apps for a full year for companies like Coca-Cola and AT&T, and we use Vuforia, and we would develop all sorts of amazing stuff in AR. All right, so moving on here. What do you foresee to happen in the future of VR? Is it going to explode, or are people still trying to kind of figure out what to do with it?
I think people are still trying to figure out what to do with it, but there's a lot of interest, and I've been to a lot of like VR AR parties just to kind of increase my network, and it's really interesting seeing the projects people have, because the current studio I work at, we work primarily in automotive VR, so we use photography to basically create stereoscopic VR experiences.
Very cool.
Comparatively, I've seen a guy I met at one AR VR mixer. They used an AR experience to essentially map out where cameras would sit on a movie set. So it's interesting because AR and VR games are pretty, like, there's still, people are really sure if those are going to take off, but the non-game experiences for AR and VR are actually they're really interesting, and there's a lot of them coming out. It's still, I don't know what the future of AR and VR is, but I don't think it's definitely not going to disappear overnight. It's definitely, this year is probably the year that the most money is going to be poured into it, and I think we're going to see next year whether people can. The big question is, can they monetize it, right? So if we can figure out how to monetize VR, that will build the interest. It's depending on what we build this year, we'll see what the future is.
Right, exactly. And I mean, we already see it, working in the AR space professionally, like we've already seen that VR and AR is being used for like industrial industries, like talking about sales and service, marketing and training applications. We're seeing more real world applications than we are for game development. But that doesn't mean there aren't some awesome games that are made with it, such as like the Rick and Morty games. Are you familiar with that amazing game called Super Hot? Dude, I loved that game, and I played it at VR World. I would never play the PC version again. The VR version is so amazing.
It ruined it, right?
Dude, it ruined it. I was like, it's boring on PC. The VR version was so cool.
And my coworker was playing Fallout 4 VR, and that sounds so exciting.
Yeah. It's just a whole new world.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, all right. So let me see here. Some questions that we have here are, what do I need to have in mind when starting in VR?
Right. It's really, so like I was saying, like the big barrier between like the thing that separates your VR experience from a typical game experience is the camera, right? So there's a certain comfort level that you have to keep in mind. Like, it's not, if I'm a game player and there's something in the sky and like you have a 1 minute sequence, me pushing up on my triggers to look at whatever's happening there isn't a big deal, right? In VR, if I'm doing this for a minute or two, my neck is going to get uncomfortable and things like that, right? And optimization is important. That's why frame rates are such a huge deal in VR. I've even played games that were like 50 frames per second and felt nauseous, right? So the consideration is you're much more directly hooked into your player than you are with a traditional game experience.
Okay, right.
So I guess user experience, that's probably the biggest thing I would preach. If you're going to dive into VR, think about how, if your player is inserted into your world, how does your experience have to change to fit that?
Right, that's actually a really great way to I mean, that's literally the way to look at that scenario, is you're actually the player and it's like a first person view of that player. And that goes into like how difficult is it to program VR versus other games? And
Yeah.
it comes down to the programming and the logic and the problem solving. It's all the same. It's just
Yeah.
now you have a different mindset because you are that first person camera. You're the camera, and you have to be mindful of things like motion blur. You need to be mindful of frame rate. Motion sickness was a big issue a few years ago. Today, it's pretty much almost gone. But like there are certain rules, like for instance, you're not supposed to do cinematic explosion effects. You're not supposed to do camera movements.
Right.
No, you can't. You're not supposed to do like cinematography within games, within VR. So it's going to be really interesting to see how people can kind of overcome that with whatever they're going to be creating next.
Right.
Let me see here. So okay, here's a question. So, are you have you ever used? So I know you're a big Unity person. Have you ever used Unreal?
I have. Actually, the first 3D game engine I ever worked in was Unreal.
Okay, very cool. And you switched to Unity. Good choice.
Yeah. So Unreal, I mean, and it's been a long time since Unreal 3, and I've kind of dabbled. I played with Unreal 4, and it's definitely a lot more user friendly than even Unreal than it was, a few years ago with Unreal 3.
Right.
Yeah, I like Unreal. The thing is, and the big hurdle that's always bothered me with working with Unreal is I know Unity so well. Like if you pitch me a game and ask me could I build something in Unity, 90% of the games that you pitch me, I absolutely can make.
Yeah.
That's how confident I feel in Unity as an engine. If you ask me to make the same thing in Unreal, there's such a big learning curve that for me to feel that confident in it, it would be massive.
Yeah, no, I'm the same way. Yeah, it's for me. I mean, for me, obviously, working with Unity technologies, it's obviously Unity for me. But I'm definitely the same way. So obviously, the answer to would you develop an AR app in Unity or an AR app in Unreal? What would you choose?
Right.
Unity, right?
It would be Unity for me because
Yeah.
but I'm super biased. To be fair, my entire career is built on Unity.
Yeah, same.
But Unreal always. And, Unity is trying to match Unreal's visuals as best as possible. But the thing is, a really pretty Unreal experience is hard to beat, right? So if you're looking for beautiful and you don't mind, I guess, embracing that learning curve, I think Unreal is a great route to go. I've tried a few Unreal-based VR experiences, and they look fantastic. I saw an Unreal demo scene where there was this killer robot at the end of a corridor, and there were cars, and he was blowing up all these objects around him, and it looked fantastic.
Nice.
It's just actually getting to the point where you could build something like that for me. Would be pretty monumental, but I'd recommend Unity. It's more user friendly in general.
Right. And today too, with all of the amazing stuff that Unity's releasing, 2018 beta just got released, and they just introduced that shader graph, which is in line now with competing with Unreal's shader graph, as well as they're coming out with what's called the scriptable rendering pipeline, which allows you to basically focus your games towards higher end devices, and overall take control of your graphics pipeline.
Right, absolutely.
Let's see. So, what do you think of the quality of graphics in VR games?
So I think graphically, I don't think VR games look. I don't think they look fantastic, but it's also, to me, it's a different kind of experience, right? I almost feel like, to some degree, I don't know if I'd want hyperrealism in VR personally. As great as some games look on a screen, it's different when it's in your face. I guess PSVR, they have the old Resident Evil demo. I forget what it's called, but you're basically strapped to this chair, and there's this zombie girl, and she kills this guy who's trying to rescue you, and all this stuff, and that was terrifying. As she holds a knife in your face and all this stuff, it was pretty intense. And even though it was a fun demo and a fun experience, I think that if that was any more realistic, I might actually die. So I'd recommend. So while the visuals aren't there, I think you just feel a lot more pulled into the experience.
Very cool. So one of the questions asked here is, do you have a YouTube channel?
Do I have what?
Do you have a YouTube channel?
I do. I don't post much. I think the last thing I posted was a demo of a shader I built. I don't post much, but I do.
Okay, very cool. Okay, so we're going to take a very quick 60-second break here. And when we get back, I have a question related to GDC's 2018 State of the Industry that just got released. Did you check that out? Did you get that email? Okay, I'm sure everyone, a lot of people got that email a couple days ago. So I got a question for you there. We'll be right back. Hi, my name is Jonathan Weinberger, and I've been developing games with C# and Unity for the last 6 years. I've helped thousands of developers learn to code and improve their skill sets. I currently teach game development on Udemy, an online marketplace for courses. Udemy has over 17 million students learning everything from game development to piano or cooking. Enjoy courses on any device and at your own pace with lifetime access. My course, The Ultimate Guide to Game Development with Unity, is designed to teach you the fundamentals of C# programming in Unity. We'll cover everything from receiving user inputs to creating destructible objects. By the end of this course, you'll make 2 high-quality games you can share with the world. This course is for anyone who wants to learn game development or refine their technique. Whether you're interested in game development as a hobby or you want to make games professionally, this course will grow your programming skill set and help you go on to make your own games and applications. Click on the link in the bottom left of the video player to access a special discount for this course. I look forward to teaching you more about game development with Unity and C# on Udemy. All right, so we're back, and the question I have here is from Tyler. And so a couple days ago, GDC's 2018 State of the Industry mentioned that 1 in 3 developers think the Nintendo Switch is the most interesting console on the market, as well as 1/3 are interested in making games for the Switch. Do you know if there are any similarities between developing for the VR controllers versus the Nintendo Switch controllers? Have you developed a Switch title?
I haven't yet. But it's super enticing. No, but I think I would assume they'd be like normal controller inputs. You know, maybe like there's like the added gyro functionality, but I can't imagine it'd be super different than like a traditional controller programming for the.
Yeah, from I haven't developed for the Switch either, and I haven't had access to their SDK. But you guys will be excited because next week the guy we do have on is developing a game on the Switch. But I imagine it's no different than developing any VR game. It's just it requires an SDK, just like VR requires an SDK. You know, whether you're making a Vive game and it requires the Steam VR plugin, you're making a Switch game that requires the Switch plugin that allows you to interact with the controllers. Here's a really interesting question. How important is sound in VR?
Oh, sound is instrumental, right? Like it's because if the idea is that your players are in the world, then the music and the sound effects that are around them, that creates the reality, right? Because that's the goal of a virtual reality experience, right? We're creating a virtual reality. So I think the first VR game I played was I think it's Deep Blue on the Vive, or essentially it's an underwater experience and it has a really it's quiet and you hear like the fish swimming around you and stuff, and it's a really kind of serene, calming experience. But because you can hear the fish swimming and you can see the coral, like, and you hear them like swoop, like close and stuff, it just sells it, right? So that when the headset comes off, you almost have to reorient yourself, like
yeah. No, I agree.
Yeah.
No, I definitely agree. When it comes to like immersion in VR, it's the sound that like puts you there.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Graphics are one thing, but the sound is what like it makes you there.
Absolutely.
So there's this one demo in VR World that's really popular, and you can actually buy it on like the Steam shop. It's where you go up in an elevator over New York City, and you have to walk onto a plank over the city. And this plank is like maybe 3 inches off the ground. It's insane how like your heart starts racing and your mind, and it's because you can actually hear the city traffic. And like that's what makes you think like, dude, this is just insane.
Right, absolutely. I think and even on the PSVR, like there's also an underwater experience, and like there's a shark tank at the bottom, right? And this basically at the spoiler at the end of the experience, a shark tries to eat you while it's in the tank, and it's very the shark basically circles the tank a bunch of times before it actually has an opportunity to get a really good shot at you. And it's just hearing the shark crunch into like the cage that you're in and hearing it mangle the metal and just hearing all that is what makes it just makes the experience. Yeah, so
Very
sounds
cool.
incredibly important.
So I got a question for you regarding, you know, you're out in California. I'm sure you're familiar with blockchain gaming. Are you familiar with blockchain?
A little bit. A little bit.
So I don't know if you know this, but Unity partnered with a blockchain called Game Credits, and they're basically a digital currency to purchase games and sell games for the, you know, for developers to take a 90% cut versus the traditional 70% cut. And they actually partnered with Unity, and their integration for Game Credits is coming out in June, and it's releasing to like, you'll be able to like one-click publish to their G Store, which is what they use on Android, and they have like their own little Steam client to purchase games. So it's pretty cool. So what is your opinion on, so what's your opinion on like blockchain and gaming?
Right. Blockchain and gaming. I'm really curious. I feel like blockchain, like DApps, I feel like that's going to be the future of the blockchain. I'm curious. It's a new frontier, right? So it's going to be interesting to see how we use like cryptocurrencies to either amplify the experiences we already have, or to just, I guess, add a different kind of economy, really, to the video we already have, right? So it's gonna be interesting. I wonder if people are gonna be more okay with spending 10 game credits versus being charged $10 for a loot crate from EA. It's gonna be
right. Yeah, it's all gonna be. I guess it comes down to, is it worth the effort to? Currently, is it worth the effort to get game credits, which is the struggle. But hopefully with the Unity integration, they're going to have access to like 3.5 billion devices that run Unity, and it should take off. Are you familiar with something called Decentraland that just happened like maybe a month ago or 2 months? Yeah, like millions of dollars for this virtual land that anyone can build things on. The only thing I hope for is a Unity integration plugin for that. I think that would be super cool.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's gonna be interesting. Yeah.
So yeah, I think there's a definite future for blockchain and gaming coming.
Yeah, definitely. I think even like Crypto Kitties had like its rise.
Yeah, and they're coming out with like Crypto Dog now, and they're
So there's definitely
it's growing.
Crypto-based game.
It is growing. Okay, so here's a really good question. So with the advancements in visual VR and how sound can immerse us, what do you think of the wearables that are coming out for VR? Do you think we're gonna start seeing like more bodysuits where you can actually start feeling things in the virtual world?
I'm kind of intrigued at the idea of like a VR suit.
Like, have you seen the movie like Ready Player One?
Yeah, right.
Like the commercial for that.
Yeah. I'm intrigued by that. I think it's gonna be kind of like everything in VR right now. There's gonna be a lot of fine tuning because the idea of feeling bullets hitting you sounds fun until you get hit by virtual bullets, right? It's like no, that. So I'm intrigued though. I think it could be. I think there's a definite possibility. It's going to be interesting to just see what how people utilize that. Even something like Shadow of the Colossus, right? Like feeling the wind of like a Colossus stomping around you, like that type of stuff would be amazing, right? It would just take you to a different world. So
yeah, I agree. I mean, I've seen some really cool stuff with like hand devices coming out now that work with the Vive, and it's like they have like these haptic touches in your fingers, and it makes it so that you can actually like you can grab an object and you'll be able to feel a haptic touch, so you know that you're holding it, and you can like crush it and you'll get like vibrations. So I mean, I think that adds a whole new level of immersion into where VR is going.
Absolutely.
Let's see here. So we're almost finished here, but we're gonna go and take a couple more questions. And yeah, I would love to see a haptic suit for VR in the future, with different sensitivity levels. So like if you wanted something super severe, you can go for that. But if you want something mild, that's an option. I do think that would be awesome. let's see here. Speaking to the shark eating experience, are there any recommendations or concerns for health safety when developing VR? Obviously, there's a nauseous aspect, and
Yeah.
people with epilepsy would probably know to be aware. But what about those kinds of like stress factors when developing VR?
Right. Boy. So this is it's interesting, right? I think if you're I think it actually be a lot of fun being scared. Like even when I mentioned the Resident Evil experience of the shark, right? Like
Yeah.
there's a fun in having that tension. There's a certain kind of maybe sick pleasure in like I feel in danger even though I'm not. I know I'm not.
Right.
I think that the most important thing is I guess consider if your player right if your player's like if your player's your camera and your players in a room and they're just I guess be mindful of their space, really, right? Like you don't want to make your player feel like they have to shuffle or move too much around a certain space because I feel like then you're going to have them at the moment everything's tethered or most of the best experiences are tethered. So you don't want an experience that makes them jump so far back that they feel the tether pulling on them or things like that, if that makes sense. It's just making sure you want to scare them, you want to make sure they feel in the environment and committed to what they're doing, but you don't want to I guess you don't want them bumping into reality to take them out of your experience, if that makes sense.
Right. No, I totally agree.
Yeah.
So let's see here. What are you? Where are you today? What are you doing today?
Right now I work at a studio. It's called Evox Images. So I work on automotive VR. So our selling point is that we can put people into cars. The only Tesla I've actually been in my life was virtual Teslas.
That's cool.
Cool to spin them around and just see the vehicles. Our app's called Relay Cars, and it's available on the Gear VR. It's going to be available on iOS soon.
Very
but
cool. How is it? How is it developing? Like that's like a real world application, right? So what's it like developing that versus a game? Do you enjoy it?
It's I do enjoy it. It's different because so games everything's in real time. So and that adds to the bugs, right? Like that's probably the biggest thing. Like there's a lot less bugs when everything isn't working in real time. There's very much a specific path down your code base. So it's pretty interesting, and also because it's more focused on people as consumers, as far as instead of like triggering all your addiction signals, or so to speak. It's just creating a more friendly experience, if that makes sense. Like we're not trying to set off your pleasure receptors or like stimulate you. We're trying to get you to we're trying to give you a product so that you can evaluate it and make better decisions. If that
Very cool. Yeah, when I was developing when I was developing AR apps, I would arguably say that developing real world applications is almost easier than games, just because of that real runtime aspect of it. You know, it's more UI driven, it's more logic driven, whereas like they hit this, do this, you know, versus in a game, you're relying on the player to do something and it has to do exactly what they want. So I think and that's what I love about being a software engineer, is that the logic and like, for instance, the logic and problem solving you encounter in games, it just carries right on over to the like real world applications, you know? And I've always told people that for myself and thousands of others, is game development is a gateway to software engineering. So just because you learn game development, you're not trapped in the games industry. It's so competitive, and if you're lucky enough to get work in it, that's great. But your skills carry over seamlessly to the corporate world, and the corporate world has a lot of money to give.
Yeah, so, absolutely. And I'm kind of biased, but I feel like I would argue that game programming is more complex than most other kinds of programming. Like, right? So, like, if you know how to program a game, you could program a lot of other things.
Yeah, exactly. It all carries over. At the end of the day, it's all problem solving, and you know, Unity is an excellent just front for everything. Absolutely. So let's see here. All right, so I'm gonna take one question, and then we're gonna go ahead and wrap things up. From Thorson. So with what you're creating with virtually test driving, how do you measure things like that? Like, how do you measure like headspace, or how do you know how long the person's torso is?
So I guess I can't get too much into the specifics, but our studio they basically focused on photographing cars for a long time, so
Right.
for decades at this point. So a lot of what we do is centered on how well our photographers photograph the car, and to a degree, because our experiences are based around photography, we don't have to account for as many of those things as you might for an app that's more real-time rendered.
I gotcha. Very cool. All right, guys. Well, we are just about all out of time. Jonathan, it's been awesome catching up with you. Definitely got to do this again. I love seeing how literally from 5 years ago when you got your first job at Sabretooth Interactive to where now, how many companies have you worked for now in the games industry?
I think it's what I'll say 8. It might be more.
Eight. I mean, it's just insane. Like you're the perfect stereotype of a game developer in California, where you work for one company and you literally walk across the street to work for another. And it's awesome, man. And I've tried to get you to come to the East Coast for job stability, but I guess your beaches are worth hopping jobs.
Yeah, I love the beach, so it's hard. It's a hard sell. Everything.
You get right. Perfect weather versus job stability. You gotta pick your battles. So thank you again for doing this. I really appreciate your time. I know my community is gonna want to love. They would love if they could ask you more questions. So if you don't mind hopping into our Discord chat to answer any questions for them, that'd be great. Also, next week, guys, we have Samuel Arminana coming on the show, and he is the developer of Cave Brawlers. He just released his game on Steam, and he's working on a Nintendo Switch title. So we'll see him next week. So that's it, and thank you guys for tuning in. Bye.